Okay, so I did resend the Zoom login instructions. I will go ahead and welcome everybody to our Congress Session 4, Environmental Gentrification. We're really pleased to welcome Gloria Orozco from the Friends of the Forest Preserve to kick off this Congress Session 4. We have a great set of panelists here to discuss this issue. A great thanks to my Congress Planning Committee, Lydia Euler from the Forest Preserves of Cook County, and Edward Warden from Shedd Aquarium, and Cherie Fisher from the USDA Forest Service. Thank you so much for helping us put this together. And we are very grateful for our sponsors who have joined us, and we can find out more about them at the end. Please feel free to use your question and answer box to send any questions to our panelists. We will answer those throughout the presentation. There will be different times for question and answer. Your mic and your video will be turned off. Use your clap, thumbs up, thumbs down. For any technical issues, please put them into the chat function. And obviously the biggest technical issue that we're having is people joining in, and we will go ahead and continue to address that. And do know that this content will be posted on our website for follow-up afterwards. But thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Laura Riley. I'm the coordinator of Chicago Wilderness. If you have any further questions after this, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to follow up with you later. Thank you. Now to Gloria.
Thanks, Laura. Sorry, we wanted to send out a poll. I'm not quite sure that got sent out before the technical issues. If not, it will be sent out now. Please fill or answer the questions for us while we move forward. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Like Laura mentioned, my name is Gloria, last name Orozco. I'm a Calumet Region field organizer with Friends of the Forest Preserves. I will be one of your moderators today, along with Peter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Peter Whitney, also with the Friends of the Forest Preserve, and I'm the Spring Creek field organizer, so the same role as Gloria, but I work in the northwest part of the county.
Thank you, Peter. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Sorry about all the tech issues. That's what happens with webinars. Today we will be moderating a panel. We will be introducing, who we'll be introducing in a bit to talk about environmental gentrification. Peter and I are by no means experts in the topic, but we thought it was important to bring the issue into the conversation. Our position allows us to have one-on-one conversations with people in the communities we focus at. From these conversations and from conversations with colleagues and other organizations, we started to realize different issues with community engagement that were not being considered or talked about. Bringing a green space into a community can possibly have a negative consequence, right? Though green spaces are great, we realized the topic was way more complex than we thought. And there are different moving parts that could negatively affect the very people we are trying to bring these spaces to. So that's a little bit of what we are going to talk about today. So now let's turn it over to our panelists. Peter?
Yeah, and thank you again to our panelists for joining us, and for everybody who joined us for the webinar today. We're really excited to dive into the topic. To begin, we're going to have each panelist provide a little bit of background about themselves and about their work, and provide a little bit of context about the issue of environmental gentrification as it relates to the Chicago wilderness area. After these introductions, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and we invite everyone to take that 5-minute break to kind of digest what you hear, think about any questions that you might have, and then share them in that Q&A function. After that 5-minute break, we'll dive into our moderated panel. So today we're really fortunate to have Tanya Schuessler from Loyola University Chicago's Institute of Environmental Sustainability, Paula Acevedo from the El Paseo Community Garden and the El Paseo Community Council, and Lorena Lopez from the Field Museum Keller Science Action Center. And Gloria is sharing some of those poll results. So it looks like we've got a great mix of folks who are very familiar with the topic, less familiar. Seems like the majority have maybe heard the term, but don't feel like they know all that much about it. And then it seems like most people think that the concept does relate to the work that their organization does. So that's great to hear, and that's a really great starting point. So we'll keep those poll results in mind as we move forward. And without further ado, we'll get started with our panelists. So I'm going to turn it over first to Tanya Schuessler.
Thank you, Peter, and hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Schuessler. I'm on the faculty at Loyola in the Institute of Environmental Sustainability, and I'm an environmental social scientist. I teach courses related to environmental justice, food systems, water, climate action, and the human dimensions of conservation. And I also do research, and one of the topics that I have been researching recently is environmental gentrification. And so what I'd like to do is provide a foundation so we have some shared understanding of what this term means, and also to tell you a little bit more about what I've been learning through some research that I'm presently working on with colleagues at Loyola. Next slide. So I want to begin by acknowledging that this is not my original thinking or work. It's not solely my thoughts here. I am working with faculty and students at Loyola. And as I move through the presentation, I'll also share with you some really valuable insights that I've learned from various folks in Chicago who we've interviewed as part of this project. Next slide. So I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience that there are many benefits to urban green space. Green spaces such as forest preserves, parks, gardens provide a variety of ecosystem services. Next slide. And I imagine that you're also aware that green space contributes to health benefits. So they provide opportunity for physical activity. Even views of natural settings can help to promote physical healing. And there are numerous mental health benefits of exposure to green space. It helps to reduce stress, to improve cognitive attention, and so forth. Next slide. And research has also documented that green spaces can help to build social connections. People come together informally in these spaces and build relationships. And formal programs that take place in natural settings, such as youth development programs, also help to build social capital. And when some of the green spaces that we work in are collectively stewarded, when people come together in gardening and ecological restoration and related activities, they build their capacity for problem solving and may be able to address other issues that are also affecting their communities. Next slide. So while there are many benefits to urban green space, and these benefits should be accessible to everyone, what might come as a surprise, it came to a surprise to me initially when I began this work, is that green space can also reproduce existing inequities. Next slide. And one of the ways that that can occur is through a phenomenon that's been called environmental gentrification. You might also hear the term ecological gentrification or green gentrification. And so this refers to when environmental improvements, and that could involve cleaning up contaminated sites, such as brownfield sites, Superfund sites, and repurposing them, or that could involve bringing in green amenities like parks and trails. When those improvements accelerate the displacement of working class residents and businesses because they make a neighborhood more desirable to others who are more affluent, rents rise, property taxes rise, and legacy residents are forced out. I want to emphasize that this is a complicated process. It sometimes happens, but not always. There are many other factors that are also at play, such as a neighborhood's proximity to transit, the quality of schools, and so forth. In research that has documented environmental gentrification occurring in cities like New York, Toronto, and others in the US and Canada, the environmental projects have sometimes been city-led, but sometimes they've been community-driven. So this can occur even if led by folks within the community who are doing good work to benefit members of their community, if we're not intentionally thinking about how that might affect other issues like housing affordability. And I also want to emphasize that the impacts can vary, and people within a neighborhood may have different perceptions. So a homeowner may welcome increased property values that, they gain equity. It might afford them new opportunities. People may want to sell in order to invest within their business or fund their retirement. So people may have different perceptions of whether or not gentrification is desirable. And in addition to the physical displacement of working class residents and the businesses that serve them, legacy residents who remain may also experience negative impacts. So gentrification can destroy the social fabric within a community. People may experience a loss of cultural identity. And so the impacts are complex. Next slide. And this poses a paradox for communities that may find themselves experiencing investment related to environmental improvements. Do they want to accept these? Do they want to work toward these? Or do they want to oppose or resist environmental amenities, perhaps, to avoid the potential displacement that could come with them? And so this is a question that researchers are looking at in a variety of places, and we were really interested in exploring here in Chicago. Next slide. Next slide. And so what I'd like to share now is part of a larger research study. Myself and two of my colleagues, Amy Krings and Colette Kopic, had the opportunity to conduct interviews with a number of different people. We spoke with 27 different folks here in Chicago who have deep knowledge and experience by virtue of their professional or their lived expertise in areas including environmental justice, health, housing, urban planning, community development. And as you can see in the graph on the right, we spoke to people who are either living in or working within various neighborhoods around the city. But it's important to note that we talked to more people who were familiar with Mexican, Mexican American, Puerto Rican, and other Latinx communities. We probably have the least representation from folks familiar with Black communities. And also it's important to note there are many other people whom we would have loved to interview for this project. So the results I'm going to share are by no means comprehensive, but we learned so much from talking with these individuals, and I'm really excited to give you a kind of a snapshot of some of that. We also have done a lot of reading on the topic specific to Chicago. Next slide. So I'll begin with some of the perceptions of, to what extent is environmental gentrification a concern here in Chicago? And a case that was frequently mentioned is that of the 606, which I imagine many of you are familiar with. Next slide. So I'll bring your attention first to the bottom of this slide. The 606 was developed across 4 neighborhoods. And the map on the right from DePaul's Institute of Housing Studies shows the premium that home buyers are willing to pay for properties that are within close proximity to the trail. And this is in the neighborhoods that initially were lower cost real estate neighborhoods. So in Humboldt Park and Logan Square. And of course, those are transitioning neighborhoods. We're seeing gentrification occurring there. The 606 is not the only driver of that. Environmental improvements are one factor amidst many. But here you see the impact. The perception. This was definitely a concern. Environmental improvements and how they might drive gentrification was definitely a concern in high or moderate cost real estate markets. And so here, a community organizer and resident said, the burden is on me and my family to fix this problem that I didn't create. While you're, referring to developers, are making millions flipping land, gutting homes, we are forced to once again uproot our lives and move to neighborhoods that don't have the amenities that Logan Square has now, that we are now told that we don't deserve. And the impacts that can occur affect not only the specific community where environmental improvements are taking place, next slide, but they might also have cascading impacts. And so we heard from environmental justice advocates in southeastern and southwestern Chicago that they're very concerned about the movement of polluting facilities into their neighborhoods as land use on the north side of the city shifts away from manufacturing to more residential, commercial, and retail development, or to parklands. This example, the example provided, which some of you may be familiar with, is General Iron, a scrap metal recycler, is moving from Lincoln Park to Southeast Chicago. Lincoln Park's an affluent community, not necessarily one I would describe as presently gentrifying, but it illustrates that the types of impacts we need to consider, not just on a community by community basis, but we need a more systemic perspective so that decisions made in one location are not negatively impacting people living in others within the city. Next slide. When we began this research, we were focused on environmental gentrification. So I was thinking about gentrification as a driver of displacement, but we quickly learned that disinvestment also drives displacement. And in Chicago, in the first decade of the century, 181,000 Black folks have been displaced and moved out of the city. I guess perhaps by choice, it depends, but as you see here in this quote, things like schools being closed, the foreclosure crisis, a variety of factors leading people to choose to leave for other places. And disinvestment raised concerns for people who were not immediately fearing that gentrification may take place in their community, but they saw the potential that that could happen over the long term as vacant lands were purchased by people outside of the community. But I had the sense that people were sitting on land to just hold on to that and speculate for when they could later sell it and profit from it. And that also limited the opportunity of community members to really have control over what was happening with land use within the community. As one of our interviewees said, the story of Chicago is a story of displacement, even if it looks different over time. So it can happen in various ways. And it's led to a general distrust, particularly in communities of color, for new things coming in. So distrust of the city or of other organizations that are proposing new investments, environmental projects, other types of infrastructure within these communities. Next slide. So this is an example, again, where there was not so much an immediate concern about gentrification, but there was definitely a sense of distrust and questions raised by environmental investments. And this is the case of Big Marsh Bike Park. And so a resident said, we're put in this difficult position because surely we would love a bike park. We would love for the residents of our community to go outdoors and get exercise and things like that. But at the same time, you're putting it in a community that doesn't normally practice that kind of outdoor activity and doesn't necessarily have the money to do so either. So we were very, very concerned about why are they putting that here? Next slide. So evident in that quote are real questions about who benefits, who bears the cost, and who makes decisions about environmental investments. And when we're, I come from the environmental field, so now, I'm thinking about the environment, but decisions that are made around that are occurring in a larger political, social, economic context, and a context that's characterized by structural racism. So Chicago is a highly segregated city, and if we're not taking into consideration that that's the case, and that environmental improvements may play into a variety of different market forces that affect housing markets, we can unwittingly reproduce these inequities. And so it's important to recognize that there's an intersection between the work we're doing with respect to environmental quality and green spaces with structural racism that exists here in Chicago and elsewhere. And this also raises real issues around power and who has influence in the development of projects and land use decisions, and at what point in the process people have the opportunity to participate, if they have opportunity for input at all. And so as one environmental justice advocate said, we kind of get overrun. The community's voice did not count as much as those from other places, and this happens quite often. And we heard a concern about that, not only with respect to the city, but with respect to larger environmental organizations, that people felt were not listening well enough to the perspectives of local community-based organizations. Next slide. So hopefully that's given you some sense of the challenges. And now I want to turn to what might be some of the potential solutions. Next slide. We heard a whole variety of different ideas for policies, strategies, practices that might help to improve environmental quality, to advance green amenities, and avoid displacement of working class residents and people of color. Those listed here are just a handful. People suggested specific policies that focus on housing affordability. People suggested zoning strategies, suggested cooperative ownership of both housing and also cooperative business ownership to create employment opportunities within disinvested communities. People wanted to see manufacturing within some of their neighborhoods, but they wanted that to be green manufacturing. People recommended that just as we might think about environmental impacts of a particular project, we should be also systematically thinking about racial equity impacts. Next slide. So there are myriad possibilities, and each of those we could, better consider the pros and cons and whether, to what extent they would be effective. But what became really clear is that there's no single solution, that we need to be considering these issues in a multifaceted way. So again, I'm from the environmental field, but I need to be thinking about how the work I do intersects with housing, intersects with employment opportunities, intersects with educational opportunities, with racial equity. And also that it's important to be thinking not only on a project by project basis, but more systemically across the city. And that's not to say that it's not also important that solutions be designed to the specific community context of individual neighborhoods, but that we need to be building more connections and collaboration across places. Next slide. It also became very clear to us that solutions will be driven by local people, that there's a lot of capacity and asset strengths that lie within the residents of our neighborhoods here in Chicago. And so many folks who are already working in these communities were recommending that there be greater opportunity for local residents to have influence in land use planning processes and decisions. And that investment should occur not only in infrastructure or specific projects, specific developments, that we need to be investing in people by providing opportunities for education and training. Next slide. But communities alone will not have the full solution. People recognize the value of technical expertise. And so I think we have much of that in the audience here. And so we have a great opportunity to bring together technical experts and local experts living within the specific neighborhoods, communities, places where we're working, and to bridge that knowledge to come up with more holistic and effective solutions. So an example, the bottom quote here, a resident said, they have lots of ideas for a green vision of what they would like to do in their community. And she added, I would want an urban planner to come and look at this stuff. Let us know what's wishful thinking, what's really doable. So building those types of knowledge partnerships is important. Next slide. So a quick recap. Perceptions of environmental gentrification in Chicago varied depending on the neighborhood where people are working. People are most concerned with respect to projects such as the 606, El Paseo, the Obama Library, kind of larger projects occurring in neighborhoods that may already have a moderate cost of housing. People are less concerned in disinvested neighborhoods about gentrification occurring in the short term, but they saw it. They saw disinvestment as a precursor to gentrification over the long term. And everywhere, investments in environmental improvements provoke the question, who is this intended for? Who is this meant to benefit? There are myriad potential interventions that may help to support green amenities without displacement. And it's going to be really important that we're approaching that work in a multifaceted and systemic way, providing opportunities for community members to drive solutions and ensuring the technical support to make those solutions come together in terms of the technical feasibility, the workability. So I'm going to pause there. I'm really enthused that we have opportunity to hear from the other panelists and then Q&A with all of you. I just want to mention that what I've shared, we are writing up in a more comprehensive report, and I'll be able to share that with all of you later this summer or in the early fall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And again, as a reminder, if folks have questions for specific panelists or for the entire moderated panel, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. And next we'll hear from Paula Acevedo with the El Paseo Community Garden and the El Paseo Community Council.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Paula Acevedo. I am one of the co-directors for El Paseo Community Garden. And we are a community managed space. So as what Tanya was discussing, there's different spaces that are more community driven. We would be one of those spaces. So I completely agree with that, Tanya's presentation. We are stuck in that paradox, as she mentioned. And, you know, we've been doing a lot of good work, we think. Next slide, please. So at El Paseo Community Garden, we are inclusive and equitable space. And some of the ways that we do this are by these following bullets. So like I said, we're a community managed space. So the site, the green space, is maintained by volunteers and donations. So it's not like what a park district would be, or the city does not provide any funding to maintain the space. We do lease part of the land from the city, but like I said, that's kind of it. And so we, my husband and I are the co-directors, and it's all volunteer work that we do. And so we apply for a lot of grants to fund all our projects, and we ensure that everything is very community driven. We are along a trail. This trail is not part of the proposed 4-mile El Paseo Trail. This trail was actually a result of the 2006 Quality of Life Plan, and it was created in 2009 in conjunction with affordable housing next door. And so that's a little bit of a difference. A lot of times we're put in the same bucket as the 4-mile trail. Just a little clarification there, just so everyone knows, we've been there since 2009, and we've slowly grown to what we are today. Another way that we like to activate the green space is we provide a lot of accessible programming in partnership with community residents or other community organizations. For instance, we provide educational opportunities for beekeeping workshops, gardening workshops, and we also hold weekly events like kids garden days, yoga, community meditation, and community stewardship days. We've hosted community potlucks in the past, and we have an annual harvest festival. So that is what you see in the photo here. That's part of one of our harvest festivals. That was also a mural dedication for our very first mural. And so that leads me into cultural preservation. Our neighborhood is changing, but one of the ways that we can kind of claim our space back is through art. Pilsen has always been known for its art, and so it was very important to us as the neighborhood's changing and you see more art that is kind of different than the art that we were used to. It was very important for us to create community-driven murals. So we found local artists. We had community design meetings, so people were able to come and see, you know, say what they want to see on the murals, the themes and the subject matter. And we also hosted a community paint day, so people were literally, you know, painting on the wall, and so that creates that sense of pride and ownership of the space. And so that's very important for us. And one of the benefits of community managed space is that it kind of makes people feel a little bit more involved, fosters, you know, civic engagement. And we also accomplish that through the last bullet, community partnerships. As I said earlier, a lot of our programming is in partnership with local residents, volunteers. We hosted a haunted garden for Halloween, and that was just because residents approached us and needed a platform to do this. And so that's what we do. We are the platform for many people who want to, you know, step up, maybe become community leaders, provide those education opportunities, and, you know, all in an accessible way to the rest of the community. Many times just free. Everything is a suggested donation that we do. Next slide. And so we believe green space is a right, not an amenity. You know, and that's the big question here. That's, you know, the topic, environmental gentrification. So like Tanya said, green space has many benefits, health benefits. We do serve a majority senior population since we are adjacent to LVEJO Medical Center and affordable housing and senior apartments that houses the satellite senior center for Pilsen for the immediate area. And so we partner with them on many of our programs and events, and their patients, their residents, they're kind of our main focus on who we'd like to serve. And so, yeah, we directly work with seniors. Most of our allotment beds are, planted by seniors. And in the Pilsen Quality of Life Plan, it lists there that the city recommends 2 acres per 1,000 residents for green space. And that's notoriously low for areas. And one of the things, our land trust is Neighbor Space. It's a nonprofit land trust that protects green space and pocket parks and community gardens throughout the city. And so that's one benefit that Neighbor Space provides, that they fill the gap for what the city is not able to provide through like the forest preserve or through the park district. And so this kind of community managed space is kind of what's increasingly providing this. It's also a belief that if we had more green space, if green space was more accessible, it wouldn't be seen as an amenity. It would just be seen as another, oh, there's a sidewalk, there's a road, just another thing that everybody should have. So, they wouldn't be able to profit off of a park. Next slide. So the question is, has our work directly caused displacement? Well, we don't really believe directly. Indirect, well, I'll continue to explain. So there's plenty of successful green spaces, community managed spaces, community gardens in other communities. And they're, many of these are not necessarily seen as gentrification. They're seen more as like food security or, a need or a park, or, it's not really too much to think about. The problem here in our neighborhood of Pilsen is that, we've been combating gentrification for a very, very long time. And like Tanya said, there's many elements, there's the word gentrification is very complicated. There's a lot of different things. Pilsen is always, it's a great location, proximity to the city, there's a lot of vacant buildings from, it was once an industrial neighborhood. So there's been plenty of large vacant buildings for such a long time that are now currently being developed. And there used to be a coal plant active, and there's community activists were part of the reason that was eventually shut down. But as soon as you see that, and this is an example of environmental gentrification, is that as soon as you saw that, there was investment in the community, many developers, speculation, you just saw a rise in development immediately. And our site itself is a converted brownfield site. So I mentioned it was created in 2009 through an idea and a quality of life plan in conjunction with affordable housing. The site that the path sits on in our garden, it used to be a rail yard and next to a metal smelter. So the EPA did come and remediate where the metal smelter was, and the rail lines, BNSF pulled their rail lines and remediated that area. And that was kind of also, I believe, a reason that spurred the proposed El Paseo Trail. So the previous administration proposed this trail, and immediately those vacant buildings that we see and lots all started being developed. So we have new developments, new single family homes coming in just right next to the garden. And I don't think that was a direct cause because of our garden, because like I said, we've existed. That was mainly a cause by this proposed trail that we still don't even know when it's going to be actually built. So it's gonna be some time, because currently the city doesn't even own the land. So it leads you to say, like, why was this announced so early? And it was premature. And so now that we see all these new developments, we're being exploited as an amenity. So people come to us and ask us, what's the status? We do like to stay involved. In my next slide, I'll explain a little more. And so we're kind of in the know of the status. But so many of the people that come and ask us are the people who came and bought, and they want to know the status because of their investment, and that's completely understandable. But we also see real estate and developments advertising, up next to El Paseo Trail, but then you see a picture of our garden. So that's when it's not so nice for us, and we have actually reached out to some realtors to ask them to take down the picture of our garden because we feel exploited. It's community managed space, managed by volunteers and whatnot. Next slide. So in response to the proposed trail, we actually received a grant that was able, the Great Rivers Grant, Chicago Community Trust, that was able to fund an initiative, which we called El Paseo Community Council. And so we spoke to many stakeholders, community organizations, some in Little Village and some here, just to try to, gather kind of a consensus of what the community's perceptions are and needs. And so the purpose of our council initiative is to unify stakeholders and residents and give them a voice in the development along the stewardship along El Paseo. So we would be creating a permanent platform for community inclusion through different committees like housing and equity, health and safety, stewardship, arts and culture, programming. So that's this ongoing thing that we would like to continue. And currently it's a little bit on a slowdown because of COVID and everything, but the first and foremost important committee is the Housing and Equity Committee. And so we've been meeting with these several organization stakeholders to try to create this committee to essentially devise much of what Tanya proposed as solutions. So many of that we also came up with for our committee. And we identified, well, I'll touch on that in a couple of slides. But yeah, so that's kind of our vision, is essentially to try to, the real problem here for us that we think, it's not the green space directly, it's that's causing gentrification, it's the housing. So next slide. So this leaves the slide, what can we do? Much of what we are trying to do in the council. So green space should be created in conjunction with affordable housing. Like I mentioned, our space has been created in conjunction with affordable housing, and that's how we're able to continue our mission and serve the people who need it the most. And so we also believe housing plans should be required for large infrastructure improvements and developments. So when I mentioned the trail was a little prematurely announced, in reality, we really believe that a housing plan should have been already in place before the announcement of the trail to protect, the legacy residents and businesses. And the same for, there's controversial, there's here near us, there's another mega development that's being proposed. So with, even when they're improving streets, when there's a new bike path coming through, and also even streetscaping, all those kind of improvements you have to take into account, the environmental gentrification aspect, like what effect is it going to have on the legacy residents, business owners. So also process for community involvement, again, something like what we're trying to create with the council. Like Tanya's presentation in the last slide, who is benefiting, who will use it, who bears the costs. So that community involvement, whether or not people even want the trail. Like I said, in our trail, our little portion, our block, was a local trail that was created as a community, quality of life plan. But now we have this big proposed trail that is kind of taken a local idea in each neighborhood and kind of just made it into a larger trail. So the community involvement process would kind of decide, is this what the community needs? Does the community want it? And then, so you also identify areas that are pre-gentrification, because so many times it's a little too late. What is it? Too little, too late. And so if you identify areas that are pre-gentrification, you could be more proactive and not reactive, But that being said, it shouldn't have to be every neighborhood for itself. There needs to be city-wide housing reform, because you see so many neighborhoods, like one of the quotes said, this is a history, the gentrification is a history of Chicago, or along those lines. And it's true, you know, so many people that just say, well, that's what happens. That's what happened to us when we lived up north, and that's just what happened, suck it up. And we don't think that should be true, you know. Why do people accept a system that's so flawed? So that leads us to support, you know, organize and support existing housing organizations, support that effort for the citywide housing reform. Next slide. So here I identify some of the organizations that we have worked with that also have been involved with our council initiative. One of the big ones that we love to support is the Pilsen Housing Co-op. They, in our opinion, with so many of the restraints that there are citywide, they have been able to, not easily, but they've been able to organize and create the Pilsen Housing Co-op that, you know, gives that opportunity of ownership for those that are being displaced. So we think that that's a really good tangible effort that should be more readily available. There should be systems in place should allow for co-ops to exist a little easier. So advocacy for that, you know, even through the private banks and loans, I understand it's very difficult. They make it very difficult for co-ops to exist. So we would love to see more co-ops, not just the one Pilsen Housing Co-op. I think there, you know, we all think that there should be many more. There's also Pilsen Alliance is a nonprofit that advocates for affordable housing, and they're a very grassroots organization. So they host so many different community events, and I've attended them, and there you can see the community is saying what they need, you know, through their meetings and their gatherings, very grassroots. So it's very important because that's the voice of the community. And then I mentioned the Resurrection Project. They are, we partner with them a lot. Like I said, they manage the affordable housing next to our site, and they're one of the main providers of affordable housing in the area. And they have to work, you know, within these constraints of the system, the housing system that we have. And so, you know, things, they would love to do more as well, but there's this larger system that needs some reform. And then we have the environmental organizations that advocate and work, you know, to protect environmental justice. We have Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, the Southwest Environmental Alliance, and the Pilsen Environmental Rights and Reform Organizations. So we're really grateful for the work that all these organizations do to protect our residents and to speak up for, you know, for the people. And so this is something that, you know, people can just support these organizations, and that's one step towards what you can do. Next slide. And that's it for my presentation. Here's our contact info if you'd like to visit us or contact us. And you could do next slide, and then you can see the beautiful picture behind that. And this is our permaculture project that we recently did with our murals in the background and that path. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about our work, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Paula. Our last panelist will just be giving a brief introduction to herself and her work, and it is Lorena Lopez with the Field Museum Keller Science Action Center. So I'll turn it over to you, Lorena.
Thanks so much, Peter. And thanks to Tanya and Paula for your great presentations. And so yeah, my name is Lorena Lopez. I'm a community engagement specialist at the Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum. But my roots are in environmental justice. And I started at LVEJO, the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, as an open space organizer many years back in 2004. And now I am working currently in one of the areas in the southeast side, in Altgeld, in the southeast side. And there, again, like I started here at LVEJO, I'm starting to see the beginning parts of, you know, greening, and as well as, you know, just thinking about amenities and assets that are going to come into community and could potentially have this, and, you know, bringing awareness to things of this nature from the beginning, and talking to community about that and how we empower ourselves to do our own visioning and our own work. And so when I started at LVEJO, it was a lot of that, is connecting with community. The Little Village Park, it's now called Little Village Park, but before it used to be called the Silatech site. And this is a 24-acre Superfund site that was highly contaminated with highly cancer-causing chemicals that ran off to people's homes on a regular basis. So if it would rain, you would get chemicals into your own house. And so through many small victories, we were able to get from the proposed 20 homes cleaned up to 171 homes cleaned up around the Silatech site from cancer-causing chemicals, as well as getting remediation done around the site that unfortunately the city nor other players within the city wanted to fix at all. It was through a lot of work with community to get this done. We did have a lot of conversations about gentrification and greening the area and what would happen, but it really outweighed the repercussions of having a site like this. And not only was it a Superfund site, but it also was a working site where a company would have big semi trucks idling the whole night. So not only was it bringing, cancer-causing chemicals into people's homes, but also was throwing off particular matter on a regular basis, on a nightly basis. And so it was one of the areas within Little Village that had a high amount of cancer cases as well as asthma cases. So folks really came together and said, we have to do this together. We have to connect and not only get this site remediated, but also get our own homes cleaned up. And so we started a core group of folks and volunteers to really work on this. Again, the site got a new testing, new drainage, so did the homes. They went as deep as 3 feet into the earth to remove all the soil from people's backyards. As you can see, there's before and after pictures of the remediation, even removing some trees of the site itself. It was a lot of work. But it was great work. And from my understanding and in development of the park, we also did charrettes where we got people's envision and what they wanted to see for this site. And it took a lot of work. And this is work that the city, the Chicago Park District wanted to take into account, but it was because community was very much involved from the beginning, it was inevitable. So a lot of the assets that community wanted to see and do around the park was done. And from my understanding, I haven't been at LVEJO since 2009, but they are working so very closely with still that very core community. And this particular area is not very far from downtown. It's about a 20-minute ride on a bus or a 10-minute train ride from downtown. And it's very accessible. And right now they're still working with community to get their envisions of what they want to see and how to keep legacy residents in place. It's a high area of renters in this area. So it's still getting renters to take ownership fully of this green space. The Chicago River is adjacent to it. And currently, one of the, if you can see on this PowerPoint, there's a store called Discount Mall, and at Discount Mall, it was just sold for $17 million. And now they want to create a new plaza called the Little Village Plaza. So when I started organizing here, it wasn't a lot of gentrification talk, but now we see it, But thank goodness there's this core group of people and individuals and the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization who are trying to push back this kind of development. The Little Village Plaza, the Discount Mall, is where I actually brought my engagement ring when I got married 18 years ago. And people still use it. It's an affordable place for everybody where you can buy jewelry, clothes, and it's a very cooperative way of having a business. And so they want to change it, and there's plans now to change that. So the hope is that community will come together again and win a lot of these victories going forward. And for my work in Altgeld, one of the things that we are concerned about, there's not a supermarket in place, but there's the talk of the proposed red line to be extended all the way to Altgeld. Altgeld is a community that has to travel more than any other Chicagoan. It would take them an hour and a half to 2 hours to get anywhere near close to downtown. They have to travel very far distances to go to get local food or any kind of fresh food. And so they're expanding the red line to this area. Altgeld is adjacent to a beautiful nature preserve called Beaubien Woods, which is one of the handful of nature preserves within the city of Chicago. And so that is something that we are in conversation with partners of, like, what this means. It obviously would mean a relief to community, but it's also having a core conversation with the residents there to make sure that things like this don't happen. And as we saw in Cabrini Green, as we saw at UIC campus, when these travel or when these amenities and assets come into a neighborhood, so does public housing go. And so we're seeing it now. And how do we keep legacy residents there? I've met legacy residents in the public housing homes that have lived in Altgeld for over 50 years. So there's real concern there when these things expand. There will be a relief, but there's also concern because this is not only an open space, it's a nature preserve with high ecological, a high ecological site. And so it can be very attractive to development and to folks who want to get a bus ride, a train ride to downtown and then go home and have green space. And as we see right now, during COVID, a lot of these residents that live in high rises are looking into buying homes, single family homes for health reasons. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorena, and all the panelists. For the sake of time, we're gonna go and dive right into Q&A to make sure that we're able to, panelists are able to answer your questions. So first question for panelists. Oh, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, not the chat box. Thank you. So first question, how do we ensure that programs that are championed by locals don't end up being appropriated by new developers? And are there ways that we can raise up the community members who live there by implementing nature-based solutions, green infrastructure?
Gloria, do you want any of us to jump in?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know that I have the answer to the first question, but other to acknowledge that in the interviews we did hear, as Paula talked about, with the El Paseo Garden being used as local developers using that as a way to sell the neighborhood and their housing to gentrifiers. We heard that from other folks as well in interviews, and my understanding from the stories that were told to me about the 606 from people familiar with its development is that began as the Bloomingdale Trail. It began from a community-led initiative, and then that was co-opted by Rahm Emanuel and others to really frame that project as something to drive investment and revenue for the city as a whole. And I don't quite have the answer as to how you could stop developers or city officials or whomever that might want to draw upon and use green projects toward their own interests. But I do want to acknowledge that it's important to be cognizant that can happen. I guess my main thought on how to avoid that would be if we had more collaborative community planning processes that really provided authentic opportunity for local residents to have more say and influence over what's happening. The second part of that question asked about green infrastructure and nature-based solutions to kind of help uplift folks within disinvested communities, or to help uplift the priorities that people may have. And I think there are lots of examples in cities where really great integrated work is happening that involves, it might involve community gardening, it might involve ecological restoration, other types of green initiatives, but they're done in ways where it's not an organization coming in and saying, we're gonna do this for the environment, but it's, you know, really listening and understanding what the priorities are of local residents, and then combining those in ways that might promote job training or education, or you know, various types of benefits that people wanna see. Thanks.
Yeah, and I would add to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Paula.
Oh, thank you, Lorna. Just brief. Well, one of the ways that we're trying to do this through the council initiative is there would be a stewardship committee. One of the big differences between El Paseo and 606 is that this would be a community managed trail. 606 is maintained by the park district. So basically the Paseo Trail, it seems like the city would like to make what we've done at the Paseo a model for the rest of the trail, to my understanding. So we would be working with even developers and other stakeholders along that corridor to implement a governance structure and stewardship structure. Because one of the big worries that we have is that if they say it's community managed, where is the money for the maintenance come from? Because currently we have to mow a lot of land and ensure that it's plowed, not to mention the conservation and maintenance of the native species we have is a lot of work. And we basically find that funding through grants. And so if they're trying to create this huge, bigger trail, I don't think that they realize all of the work that we do. And so that would be great to establish some kind of what funds it. I know people have talked about special service areas, but then there's a lot of nuances within how that works that could also negatively impact community members. I've heard that you can adjust that and create parameters for that would, you know, make the developers or other people, more affluent people, pay more into the SSA versus the legacy residents. But like I said, I'm not an expert in this, so that is a concern that we definitely have. But in our corridor that we're focusing on the Sangamon corridor, like within our block and then the developments down all the way to 18th Street, we would be working with the developers, and we've already had a series of meetings on how to host community design meetings, and which includes input on what the developers are doing. So for instance, we've been working with talking to the developers for Mural Park down the street, and they have plans to create a huge plaza. So we would want to create, once again, COVID kind of put a damper on everything, but we want to have community design meetings that they would say, you know, have the input on not only the whole Paseo corridor there in Sangamon, but what kind of amenities or the plaza and different ideas that the developers have. So I don't know if that answered the question. Go ahead, Lorena.
No, and just to think about future green gentrification, that I learned this lesson through working at LVEJO is really having the community buy-in, and that requires for you to, as an organization or a community leader, is to work with them, and like Tana said, is listening to community, and sometimes victories come in those small things. So around the Little Village Park, they really, you know, as we were working, I'm like, this park is going to get built, and folks didn't believe that that's going to happen. But as we started getting better lighting or new curbside or, you know, really getting buy-in from and connecting with the local aldermen and really finding these small victories that really led to a core group of people really believing in themselves to really be the forefront. Because at the end, we had to have real conversations with these developers and the people responsible for contaminating the site. So Honeywell, so I had these folks who came in and strengthened and enlightened and said, we can do this, si se puede. And we're able to directly talk to Honeywell to get them responsible for cleaning up at least some of the site and doing new retesting. It really is vital to not only, you know, because sometimes it's a lot to swallow and it's a lot to take in, but if you walk with community and if you really connect with them on a one-on-one basis, you can have some real ambassadors to talk about what they want to see and envision for community. So it really takes some real core and in the beginning process of connecting with folks. And it was not easy, but it really did help. And that's why we had a lot of victories at the end with the Little Village Park.
Some of your answers kind of hinted at this next question that we have, but I'll go ahead and restate it for all of our panelists, and maybe some more examples will come to your mind. We had a question. I am thinking about the contradiction of public land and public projects. Although intended for all members of the community, parks like the 606 are developed by the state or the city and benefit capital via gentrification and corporate partnerships. Could also lead to more surveillance and policing of communities and state management. So a kind of a two-part question here. Are any of you finding more momentum for community-owned environmental development? And also opposite, are there common hurdles for such projects that you found?
Well, I can kick us off again by just, I mean, so like the work that's, that Paula's doing with the garden, the work by LVEJO to develop LVEJO Park. I mean, these are great examples of community-driven environmental projects. And we, in the interviews that we conducted, we talked to a number of different people that are working with community-based organizations, and some of those were environmental, many of those were not, but they're often working on a range of different issues like housing, education, employment, health, and they're doing the type of work that Lorena was describing. You know, they have relationships with residents, they're facilitating inclusive opportunities for people to share you know, both in terms of concerns and what they want to see happen, as well as their assets and their strengths and how they can contribute, and they're building that resident power. So I think that like those of us who may be in larger organizations where we're not necessarily based in a single community, or we may be somewhat disconnected from the community, can look at building our relationships with the folks who are already present on the ground doing that work. And then I'll just mention, like, in other places, there are initiatives like some of you may be familiar with them, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative in Boston, which is a well-known community land trust. A lot of emphasis on housing affordability, environmental quality, and so forth. People United for Sustainable Housing in Buffalo, which has established a green development zone. An organization called Living Coley in Portland that integrates green infrastructure with combating poverty. So I do think that that great examples exist, but that we have a lot more to learn about how that comes about.
As I said in my presentation, one of the suggestions we had was for anytime there is, obviously we need more affordable housing to begin with, but anytime affordable housing or senior apartments or any of these kinds of residential buildings are created, we like to see green space community gardens as a result of that, because community gardens also, it's food security for those in need also. And like we said, all the health benefits of the socializing and the gardening, and provides many benefits. And so that's something that we would love to see, like if they create a model. Well, I feel like the model, we do have a model in our space, I feel. And if that could be recreated, because you can see, you can look up the Chicago Urban Agriculture Mapping Project. You can look on there and see all the different sites near you or wherever, and you can kind of see how they're all over the city, in North Side, in the South Side, in the West Side, and each space is very different. Each community garden is very different, but you do see in more affluent areas that community gardens see more of an exclusive club versus food security or communal space. But that's why we pride ourselves in the fact that we are a public open space for the community. Our beds are you know, people could take the vegetables from the beds technically, but it's very important to have spaces that are inclusive to all.
I've got a next question, kind of again touched on a little bit, but this one regarding affordable housing plans. And I think LVEJO and your work, Lorena, is a good answer for this, but are there any other case studies or success stories of communities that have reduced harmful environmental impact, such as pollution, without then causing displacement or being related to it?
You know, I didn't do a whole comprehensive, I think the next question as well that Mario asked seems to be asking about that. One of the things that we're doing is working with the Chicago Housing Authority. Last year, we planted native gardens at the senior homes within the city of Chicago, including one in Pilsen, which was a lot of fun. And bringing this and working with the seniors to come and plant, because there is some green space, and we were trying to bring up the ecological piece to it, and hopefully connecting seniors with nature and nature with seniors. And then we also, and this is answering Mario's question of the beautification in Altgeld. Tomorrow we have a plant distribution in Altgeld to 140 residents who are seniors who will receive native plants, a combination of native plants and other perennials to plant in front of their homes. And we did this last year with 75 residents as well. So this last year we did 75, this year we're doing 140. And it's to bring up that ecological piece. There is opportunity to plant there, and they get, you know, people are excited to do this and have that in front of their homes. And working again, yeah, with people for community recovery, to talk about what that means for a community of like beautification. Does that spur off gentrification? Does that bring more of it? At this moment, I think it's just bringing in greening to a higher ecological, there is grass, but it's that higher ecological restoration of the site of the homes. And hopefully what we're working with community is connecting community to nature, to the adjacent local area, and learning more about that, and connecting where there was a need. They still, so for example, the Chicago Housing Authority was giving out perennial plants, and we just said, hey, can we bring in some native plants to go alongside with those plants as well? And so it's really working with partners and meeting them where they're at, and we were just enhancing with the work that they've already been doing.
Thank you, and maybe a quick follow-up for you, Lorena, as well. Antonio Flores asked, what group or groups can we connect with to help support Keeping Discount Mall?
Yeah, it's the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization is working on that. And they're, of course, they're really flooded right now with the demolishment of the coal-fired plant. They're facing a lot and trying to keep, you know, the Little Village Park safe, the demolishment of the coal-fired plants, and now the new development of this plaza. But there is other organizations that I can tell you right now, but I will follow up with you, Antonio, who are working towards this plaza. I forget the name, but there is another organization that's doing work directly on that in the development of the plaza. But it's, for a lot of us who grew up in Little Village, it's, you know, I remember the first day it opened, and it's such a cultural thing for folks in Little Village, and to see it go via loss.
All right, our next question is getting a little specific, so I know you can see the questions as well, so feel free to read it as I read it out loud or read along. It's from someone in the audience. Have you heard of the study by researchers Alessandro Rigalone and John Christensen titled Greening Without Gentrification, Parks-Related Anti-Displacement Strategies Nationwide? And the study explores successful anti-displacement strategies. Some of the strategies they found were successful include regulation, such as rent control and inclusionary zoning, value capture, capturing increased tax revenues to invest them in ways that benefit the community at large, collaborative development, such as nonprofits, community organizations, parks and government agencies, and developers working together. Do you have any thoughts on these strategies or are familiar with this study?
I'm familiar with the study in that I've read likely the same document, the same report from it as the person asking the question, and I'll put a link in the chat for others who are interested in it. So I think it's a great resource in that it does suggest very specific policy and other approaches that that have been applied. They studied different parks across the country. They surveyed people who were involved in those initiatives and to compile the types of strategies that people were using to try and avoid displacement that can accompany environmental improvements. And so I can't really speak to the specific policies and strategies that are included. It's one kind of beyond, each one of those somebody could research more deeply. And also I think the solutions that are going to be the right solutions are going to depend upon a particular place and community. And again, likely more than one strategy will be necessary, and the strategy should be developed collaboratively across local communities and policymakers. But I think that study is certainly a great resource and would recommend folks take a look at it.
Well, I'm not familiar with the study, but I do know there's a lot of efforts in the community that advocate for such things as the rent control. In the inclusionary zoning, there was description, what do they call it? There was something that was passed, an ordinance, the ARO housing ordinance, that was a step towards it. But many critics say that it's not enough. It doesn't protect the small, because the most affordable housing is provided by small landlords, and that ordinance doesn't protect that. It kind of just helps create larger, more affordable housing, apartment buildings, the larger ones. And so, I mean, we're still not doing enough here. There's still a lot more to do, obviously. But it's really difficult with the systems in place to actually pass something that's 100% what the community wants. Things get diluted through the process, which is another really, negative aspect of why we're in the situation to begin with. But yeah, thank you for sharing the study.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I will read it. And again, like Paula said, there's a lot of this that already people have been advocating for. And the most better affordable housing is when there's single ownership. I've seen affordable housing being labeled as affordable housing, and it really truly isn't. When you try to develop around these spaces, like when you use the city, they think affordable housing is a house, one-bedroom apartment that starts at $250,000, which is unattainable for most of us who are working class communities. And having housing this way, just it spurs gentrification. They're just putting a label to it, from my understanding, so they can check mark a box. So yeah, but I will be checking out this the study.
One more comment I have is like Lauren is saying, like the definition of affordable is not affordable. So that's why many community people are using the word attainable, because what is attainable? I mean, right now they are defining affordable housing based on the median income for, I believe, the county or the city, I don't know, a very large area, obviously, when the city of Chicago is notoriously segregated, and like we mentioned, all the inequities that we do have. So how is it fair to say it's affordable in an area that's already, experiencing disinvestment? Or, how can you say that affordable term is the same as people in another area? So yeah, that's what we mean by like citywide reform. There's so many things that are limiting what people that are trying to provide these things, like they're limited, their hands are tied with so much of the policy that we do have. Definitely.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Some really great things were talked about today. We're gonna pull up the slide right now with, in case you want any further information or want to contact any of the panelists or Peter or I, feel free to reach out to any of us via email. Thank you everyone for your participation in the panel discussion. We will be pulling up final poll questions right now. If you could please answer those before you head out. I imagine there was an overwhelming amount of information shared today. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's a really complex topic. As you heard from our panelists, there are different moving parts that could, prompt displacement. One key point is that our solutions will be community driven. Talk to the communities you are working with or want to work with. Instead of being an organization that comes in, does the project they want to do, and leaves the community to care for the project they didn't have any input in the first place, become a resource to them. And that's something that we're trying to do ourselves. So just final thoughts to leave you with, and I will turn it over to Laura for some final words.
Tanya, do you want to jump in real quick before I just do a wrap up?
Thank you. I wanted to just build on Gloria's, we've emphasized a lot the need for community engagement, and I just wanted to offer a few additional thoughts on how to go about that from the interviews that we did. So one of those is to really focus on building relationships. I recently heard somebody said, connect before you collaborate. And so to recognize, there are a lot of pressures that might be related to grant deadlines or to other things, but we really need to take the time to build relationships and to know that the process will take time, but we'll have better outcomes as a result. Another is to direct resources for community engagement. So it takes time that requires, that may require staff. You may need to think about providing childcare, may need to think about if I'm inviting people to a planning meeting and a number of people are professionals who are being paid as part of their job, then how am I compensating residents who are volunteering their time? So to recognize that it requires resources and provide the resources for that. And then also to think about how to embed criteria related to racial equity within decision-making processes. So some of the folks we interviewed specifically referenced Chicago United for Equity. They offer one process for doing that. But there are other tools also available, but to explicitly start thinking about racial equity impacts within the criteria for the decisions that we're making around the environmental work that we're doing. So I just wanted to offer a little bit more nuts and bolts that I hope people might find helpful in terms of how to move forward with authentically engaging the communities where we work. Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome. Thank you so much to everyone for being a part of this great discussion today. I really appreciate your time and effort. Follow up with our panelists further for direct questions. And I wanted to let everyone know that we are going to be continuing Chicago Wilderness Congress every Tuesday through the month of July at 1 o'clock. So register for our next session. If you are currently a Chicago Wilderness member and you receive information about our programs and projects, great. If you're not and you want to explore ways to get further involved and join committees and find out more about what's going on, please follow up with me separately. You can either contact me through our webpage or just with my email, which is up there, but we would be happy to find ways to help you get further involved with this. And thank you to our generous sponsors for this event. We couldn't do this without all of them. We had envisioned a full day in April and had no way of knowing that we would be able to reach more people through this virtual format. And we're really grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that. So if you have any comments or feedback, please let me know. There's my contact information, and look for information about upcoming events. Thank you for joining us. And thanks to our great speakers. You did a great job.